Hello and welcome to SAE Tomorrow Today. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to welcome Dr. Moritz Neukirchner, Senior Director, Head of Cross-Portfolio Growth and Strategic Alliances, Elektrobit. On today's episode, we'll explore how Elektrobit is helping to make software-defined vehicles practical, scalable, and secure. We hope you enjoy this episode. Moritz, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Grayson. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here because we're going to discuss a topic that I find very interesting that is constantly evolving and constantly changing, SDV, commonly known as software-defined vehicles. Let's start with the big picture of this. What is the future of SDV?
I think the big question, first of all, is where do we stand with SDV? When I look at it today, I think most technological problems have been solved. Doing OTA updates, having partially updatable ECUs, being able to flash different ECUs within the car, that's becoming more and more of a commodity. When I look at the organizational changes and the developer experience, how it has transformed, and this is still lagging behind quite a bit. So when I look at the SDV reality in the field, there's a bunch of cars that are getting updates. I mean, a couple of years back, everyone was referring to Tesla. Pretty much every major OEM does OTA updates today. But the big question is, what is the customer benefit that I get out of it in the end? So I was talking about SDV levels quite a bit before in LinkedIn and so on. And we always focused on what does the end customer perceive as an SDV and what is the perceived value add that we get. So fixing bugs for a car that you've bought over OTA, that's not a value, that's an inconvenience. And it doesn't make it better if you do it more often. So actually rolling out value to end customers, that's one of the key points. And this is where we're still lagging behind quite a bit. And then, of course, we got to have the angle towards AI. Right now, the next big buzzword that keeps on popping up is AI-defined vehicle, but we got to be very precise on, again, what is the customer benefit that we want to bring? And I think both worlds are extremely closely related, because when you think about complex workflows, complex new functionalities that you want to introduce to a vehicle, like I want to order pick up food on my way home, and want to pick it up and should be just about ready when I arrive at the restaurant. Well, you're not going to make the usability and the user experience over a touchscreen for that. Try operating this while driving. Driver distraction would be a huge problem with this. So I think when we look at customer interaction, making sense of vehicle data for a software developer, these are really points where AI is one of the key ingredients actually on how to evolve the vision for SDV, because a lot of the use cases are, simply put, extremely hard to operate while driving.
You hit the nail on the head. Customer benefit. So let's underline that and let's bold that because we're going to dive into that because you're right. I had one of the first vehicles that had ChatGPT enabled in it. And it was horrible. I won't say the OEM, it was horrible. I asked it a simple question, where's a good place to go surfing? Well, I don't understand your request. That is a very simple request. If I'm in the vehicle and I have a surfboard, I want to know where to go. So obviously, you have certain OEMs that want to deploy the technology to say, I'm sorry to say it, they want the press release. And then you're saying, okay, no, wait a second. You have to focus on the customer benefit, and you're 100% right on that. How do you balance that so when the technology gets deployed to the car, the customer, the consumer, the driver is like, oh, this is great. I like this. How do we achieve that?
So you really have to look at what do you want to achieve as an OEM with SDV. And I think the discussion has shifted significantly over the last year or year and a half. A lot of times people previously were just talking about adding new functionality. I mean, we had all those big dreams a couple of years back, like we want to introduce an app store and own an app store and roll out ADAS functions and these kind of things. A lot of it has gone to the background now. And a lot of times OEMs recognize that even if they are capable of rolling out such functionalities, monetizing on them is hard. For some of them, you have a willingness to use by the customer, but not a willingness to pay, because a lot of these things you get for free on your phone. So whatever use case you look at, you need to be very specific on, well, is this something that we simply copy from a phone, or is this something that really regards a vehicle as a mobility device, not as a general purpose device. And how the discussion has shifted in the last 18 months or so is a lot of OEMs put the SDV discussion under the umbrella of cost savings. How do we make the vehicle cheaper again? Which is a certain customer value, but the customer doesn't really perceive it as an SDV per se. But when we look at transformation towards zonal architectures, consolidation of functions, all the itty-gritty details that can help reduce integration cost, or looking at developer experience for software developers for automotive, these things are also circulating around SDV, but they don't really create a perceivable customer benefit in terms of new functionality. And this is really where reality and ambition are drifting apart.
If you look at, go back to telecommunications, Telefona in Spain, Verizon Wireless here in the United States, and let's go back pre-iPhone. They bundled everything under the sun. We can do an app store better than this. We can do an app store better than that. And then along came Apple with the iPhone, and it completely upended that entire model. And I remember the fights. Wall Street Journal did a really good job of documenting this, by the way. When Steve Jobs got in the huge fight with Verizon, Verizon wouldn't bend over the apps, and that's why AT&T got the deal, because it seems that when you're going to build an SDV, that the consumer wants to have that mobile experience in the car, and they want all of their content to shift and go with them. But and some OEMs saying, oh, no. We control this ecosystem. How do we overcome that? Do OEMs perhaps open up the SDV with APIs to developers to build experiences that connect to consumers' phones? How do we overcome from what the OEMs want to what the consumer, who at the end of the day is paying money for the vehicle, wants? How do we bridge that gap?
So I think this is where we have already had the mindset shift within OEMs. So this discussion is a discussion of the past, I would say. So having the dream of owning an app store, that's gone. It's simply unrealistic. Also, even when we look at the pure production volumes, I mean, look at the number of produced phones and look at the number of produced vehicles. Building a parallel ecosystem doesn't make a whole lot of sense, except if it's really something related to the vehicle as a mobility device. And there's now a trend in the opposite direction. Well, if we can't control it, can we make it open so no one else controls it? So we are seeing a rather large push for open source solution for consortia. So we're looking into Eclipse SDV, for instance, with the S-Core middleware initiative. We are looking at Covesa with the vehicle signal specification. Same thing is going on in Japan right now when we look at the vehicle API that the JustBar working group is doing. So we see a strong push towards more standardization, more open source, more in software collaboration rather than collaboration via specification. This is changing, yet when we look at it from an overall stack perspective, so what does it take now to deploy a function from one OEM vehicle into another one? This is still not resolved. We still see a lot of fragmentation. And we can, of course, ask the question, well, how long is this fragmentation going to persist? I still think it's going to be around for a long, long time because product cycles are longer than phones. Lots of legacy that you need to carry over because it doesn't make sense to re-engineer. From that perspective, fragmentation, convergence to open solutions is still a big point. But this is also how, for instance, the topic of Linux comes in. Well, let's use ecosystems that are already established and make them usable in an automotive context and not just try to redevelop everything in an automotive flavor of open source.
Safety critical Linux is one of Elektrobit's key focus areas. Why focus on that?
When I look at how you develop software, what kind of ecosystems you can use, what kind of tools are available for free, what kind of access to developer pools you have. Every computer science student leaving university has worked with Linux at some point in time and is at least halfway familiar with it. When you look at convergence of technologies, so you mentioned ChatGPT in your car. Well, guess what? These things are not being developed on proprietary operating systems, and you start porting things over specifically for automotive with no added value for anyone. And So for most software developers, the preferred platform is Linux today. And the big question is, well, do we really need to drop that ecosystem compatibility because of safety, or can we instead make it usable in a safety-related context? And this is really where this plays in. Employ open source, make use of existing ecosystems, try not to break established ecosystems, but actually integrate them into automotive. For SDV, we got to get out of that corner to try to re-engineer everything in an automotive flavor. We really need to be open to get more technologies outside of automotive in, because that is what really gets us the speed.
When you open to, say, non-traditional automotive technologies, does that also open the door to a new pool of engineers and a new pool of developers that are comfortable working on the Linux platform that can build better experiences?
Yes, of course. And this is also where initiatives like Covesa with vehicle signal specification come in. So, of course, you want to get to a developer experience and tooling experience that is as seamless as possible and that people are already used to. Or when you look at, well, is AI already trained on a certain ecosystem? Well, I can tell you for Linux, it's quite a natural, obviously. And then when we go layers above, so how difficult is it to develop an application that makes use of your tire pressure sensor, makes use of the actuator to roll up your window up and down, to access the temperature sensor of your car? Right now, a lot of times this involves reading specific CAN signals, reading specific SUM-IP services, fiddling around with data that is not even just OEM specific, but a lot of time vehicle generation specific. So even when you're looking at a single OEM, well, depending on which car you're looking at, you need to write the interface differently. This is what Covesa VSS is trying to do with the vehicle signal specification. Can we get a data access standard? So when I want to get the speed of the vehicle, I don't need to get a bit vector, left shift by 2 bits and get the speed in inch per second. But come on, I get a float in kilometers per hour or miles per hour if you like, and you're done. And the developer doesn't need to care about how it is being integrated into the vehicle. And these are really the things that enable that speed that we really always promised for SDV. For SDV, you need to look at the developer experience and the speed that you can actually make things happen.
In order to get that speed, does it come down to standards and standardization? So if a developer, say, is working on Acme platform A and then working on Acme platform B, they can somehow meet in the middle over time and accelerate it?
Um, this is the question now is on compatibility and can we converge later on? And this is where these standards right now help to get closer to it. But there's a lot of itty-gritty details in these implementations. So we not only need to look at how do I access data of the vehicle, you also need to look at, for instance, a deployment format. Like, what's the .exe file that you install in your car? Is it a Debian package? Is it an Ubuntu package? Is it something completely proprietary? Is it a binary blob that I transfer? And how do I install this? How do they access persistent storage on an ECU? So there's a lot of infrastructural choices that you need to make in these platforms. So just the vehicle API is not the problem, but this is also where we have now this strong push for these different standardization and collaboration initiatives to converge, to actually integrate into each other. So, for instance, AutoSAR, Eclipse, SDV, and Covesa are now intensively talking with each other. And this is a good sign because it gets us closer to something where we actually can converge to something more standardized.
Where do you feel that OEMs tend to underestimate the complexity of building out an SDV system?
Let me answer in a bit of a different way, where they have underestimated the complexity and what they focus on today. And this really looks at that theme of right sizing and SDV ambition. So when we started off with SDV as a topic and had a lot of these customer interactions, I heard statements like, "We want to redo the operating system and deliver for all ECUs, for all functional domains, and have every ECU upgradable in the car." And then you need to look at customer value again. Who in the world cares about a software upgrade on your washer wiper ECU? There's simply no value in it. So the issue that we've had over the last years, and this is also why we see this big shift in SDV focus, and for some SDV is now a burned buzzword even. Going from over ambitious, we have to own the platform, control and build a new ecosystem, rebuild everything, have everything upgradable, to something more nuanced. So, well, my washer wiper ECU, I may want to have the update capability if there's like a cybersecurity vulnerability or a bug fix that I need. May not necessarily be needed depending on the type of ECU. Then there's some things where you say, well, like ADAS functions. Yes, I do want to have software upgrades because the customer would value this. But come on, you have like homologation requirements, you have safety requirements. You got to be a bit slower, a bit more cognizant on all the validation and certification topics that you have. And then you have the colorful app ecosystem. Well, you want to have user-driven updates and installations of functionality. So got to handle it again differently. And this is one thing where you have to ask, okay, what kind of upgradability software development workflows do I need per category? How do I build my platform? What's the use cases that I want to get on the car? I've had discussions with customers that said, well, we want to do SDV. And I said, okay, what for? What's the customer value? And you see that they are starting to think and then sometimes come up with ADAS. And my immediate reaction is, okay, are you sure that the first thing where you want to introduce functional upgrades is a safety-rated real-time system? So you need to look at the implications and the value, and also whether the value is what you would want to have for your customer base. If you're building a super sports car, introducing upgradable ADAS functions, I'm not really sure whether it's the best use of your resources as an OEM. So you need to look at the value that you need to want to deliver to the end customer and build the architecture for this. And this is the big shift that we see with right-sizing SDV ambitions, looking what differentiates me, where do I really need to spend money? And then there's one thing that OEMs really underestimated, and that is the complexity of their portfolio, looking at different EE architectures because of different brands, looking at different price points of vehicles. So especially when you talk to big global OEMs, they typically have not one EE architecture, but several. So do you build the platform for one of these several EE architectures or all of them at the same time? And then you have some OEMs that build vehicles that cost 15K and other vehicles that cost 100K. So you cannot necessarily put the same hardware in it simply because of cost reasons. Is this the same platform or different one? So really being able to manage variance in this, to handle legacy ECUs, because you don't want to reintegrate your washer wiper ECU. You just want to take it off the shelf, plug it in the new car, and no one cares what it does, and just keep this stable. So looking at the productization of that platform and the repeatability of the platform, not just making a one shot. That's really one of the key points. And when we now look at companies that have been leading SDV, a lot of them were very narrow in their portfolio, like comparable price point of vehicles, 3-4 vehicle types perhaps. That's about it. That's where you start to roll out. That was easy. But when you now start trying to roll it out to a big global international OEM, it becomes a lot more complicated and you need to look at the legacy. So really, brownfield solutions for SDV are the key for right-sizing SDV ambitions. And this is what has been left out a bit.
Then the question becomes, how do legacy OEMs adapt that mindset? Because you're right, but it just seems that, some of these individuals, they're 20, 30 years, sometimes longer, and they have this mindset, this is the way that we do things. How do you overcome that?
Well, a lot of OEMs have now overcome that through a lot of pain. Um, I mean, very openly, we've seen a lot of SDV programs being discontinued or being significantly ramped down or completely reset from a technological perspective. And this has been the case across the region. So it's not like you can limit to the Americas or to Europe or to the APAC region. We've seen this across the board. So many OEMs have had that learning experience. There were a couple that were a bit more cautious on their SDV investment, and they can, of course, now look at what others did wrong. But I think the learning is already there. This is why I said, well, SDV is a big buzzword of, well, let's roll out all the function upgrades for everything all the time. That these days are gone. We are now in the era of right-sized SDV ambitions, brownfield solutions, making things scalable and actually appropriate for the intended customer base.
When you look at scalability, your company Elektrobit, you're in this blew my mind. You're in over 630 million vehicles around the world. 630 million. Let that sit in for a minute. How did you achieve that? And what is your software unlock that you're in 630 million vehicles and counting?
First of all, Elektrobit is a software company. So we do some degree of hardware design. We never do hardware manufacturing. So we are driven by software. And the other thing is we focus especially on non-differentiating functionality, or where it becomes differentiating, actually do this for a specific customer. So we don't try to compete with the value proposition of our customers. And this is where you actually drive software products that are generic enough that are applicable for a large number of OEMs or tier ones so that it's easy for them to adopt. And this is really the goal. So when you look at general IT, you typically wouldn't come to the idea to say, well, I now build my own Linux distribution. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You typically take one that's already there because someone has already made the investment. This is exactly also how we operate. We look at what makes software development easier for our customer base, what enables them to actually provide the value that they want to bring to the customer, the differentiation that they want to have. And we are enabling these iteration cycles, this innovation at our customer base without interfering with their differentiation, with their business model.
And you've said that up to 80% of software budgets go to maintaining legacy code. 80% legacy code. That's not good. That's not good.
Yeah. So it's not about only maintaining legacy code, but also when we look at process compliance, for instance. Um, And you got to take the 80% with a grain of salt insofar as, well, you have a solution like a functionality, and you need to integrate it into a new vehicle because you want to have a carryover. So you start spending money on it. And you also have the maintenance periods of vehicles. So this is something that is very different from the smartphone world. Well, if you got to provide 10 to 15 years maintenance for a software after start of production, that really just puts a lot of effort on that maintenance. That's money that you need to invest into such solutions. Also, there you have to ask the question, okay, do I really want to do this myself, or actually do I want to have like a centrally maintained thing and share the cost with other customers that can actually use the same stack? So looking at, okay, how do we get software solutions scalable across different customers, looking at the common parts, looking at the value generation for them, how they save cost in development and integration. This is one of the key points here.
Is 15 years a common denominator across the globe of how long the software has to be maintained? Is that an EU regulation, a UN regulation, or is that just a common thread of how long the software tends to have to be updated and serviced?
It depends to some degree on the OEM, but we also have the UNECE R155 regulation that looks at cybersecurity maintenance. And there we have specific time windows mandated by law for which you need to provide cybersecurity maintenance for in-vehicle software.
So there's a lot of moving parts in SDV, and there's a lot of partnerships, and one of them is you have a partnership with Mobileye. You talk about that partnership, please?
So with Mobileye, we have been working together, especially on the Linux for Safety application. So when we look at ADAS, one of the fields still with the highest growth rates in terms of investment into the field, and looking at where these solutions come from. So you look at AI-based stacks to some degree, but also deep down safety, classic engineering aspects. And this is precisely where the Linux for Safety applications kicks in. Can we actually make software development for these ADAS platforms more seamless, more natural in those terms? Can we get rid of proprietary solutions that lock you in, that incur high cost? And can you use the tools that you actually love and not the tools that you are forced to use because it comes with a certain stack? And this is really what we're doing with Mobileye. So looking at use of Linux for safety applications in the context of ADAS and actually bringing this forward.
As the SDV ecosystem expands globally and new entrants come online, how do you, from an Elektrobit standpoint, ensure that collaboration and communication stay front and center? Because as you and I know, historically in SDV, there's been ups and downs, but as this grows, this pie grows, how do you ensure that collaboration and communication stays key to the core?
You mean communication in terms of like corporate communication or internal communication? How do you see that question?
Just being able to communicate with your peers
Hmm.
as you work towards common standards to accelerate the software. Because if everybody works in silos, nothing is going to move forward for the benefit of the consumer.
First of all, I mean, also from an internal communication, we used to have this big uncertainty, what the hell is an SDV? So that these days are fortunately long gone by now. You can imagine the number of discussions I had about that. For me, there was one interesting inflection point in types of and style of communication. So when I published the SDV levels, um, comparatively to the levels of autonomous driving that the SAE published a couple of years back, this shifted the style of communication that we've had with customers, and I'm more than happy that people picked up this communication. The entire framework is by now open source within Eclipse SDV, because it helped put the customer focus up and center there for everyone. And it helped to level set the discussion because we no longer looked at the technical implementation first, but what is the benefit? So I literally had one interaction with an OEM customer shortly after I published that piece, and he said, "Well, thank you for that. I just had a discussion with my team internally, and they were like, SDV, you're now telling us we should do SDV. What the hell does this mean?" And he said, I pulled out the levels and said, guys, we are currently between SDV level 1 and 2. So on connected and updatable, we want to get to level 3, so upgradable on a single platform. Right now, I don't care about level 4 and 5. And then the team said, okay, thank you. Now I know where we need to go. Now I know what the capabilities from a platform perspective are that I need. So this was, in terms of communication, really a way of changing the communication, because it's with that framework way easier to articulate your ambition where you want to go. Before that, we a lot of times had like things when you talked about SDV, someone said, well, I want to get the app store, like the big fancy shiny idea. And others, when you talked about SDV, said, well, I wanted to have an OTA update for this specific ECO. And it's a holistic thing like a binary blob installed it on a microcontroller. And this framework really helped to level set the discussions, talk clearly about ambitions, what you want to do, and then also more clearly articulate the necessary technical steps and organizational steps to get there.
How did you, one, come up with the idea for the SDV levels, and how did you build the levels?
I really have to say big thank you to Maite Bezerra here also. We did have a discussion right before I wrote these things down on, well, not every OEM has the same ambition. Not everyone wants to reach the same thing, and right now there is no good way of articulating this in a clear manner. So this is where I was reminded of the autonomous driving levels. Before we had those, everyone was, well, autonomous driving, and some meant like an ACC with the lane keeping assist, and others meant, well, I don't want to see a steering wheel. And when you look at the discussion today in autonomous driving, there's no one that talks about autonomous driving. You talk about an L2 plus function or an L3 or an L4 function, and everyone knows what's behind this. And this is really the point that I wanted to address with these levels, to make clear, okay, what's the ambition that we want to reach, and how do we clearly articulate these aspects.
But putting this in simple terms, was it trying to help individuals understand how the technology is evolving and where they could get started on their SDV journey?
No, so the first point was changing the style of communication for SDV from a pure technical perspective to something that actually describes user benefit. The trouble that I had until then was always, do I need to switch to a zonal architecture to have an SDV? No, not really. Do I need to have OTA? Do I need to have intranet connectivity? Do I need to have containers in my high performance controllers on top of Linux, or can I do without? And I was feeling these are the wrong questions, because you need to look at, what do I want to build for a customer? What does the customer see in the end? And then we can talk about the solution. And then there was the part in the SDV levels that's not purely about the technical enablers, but what is the business enablers? What do I need to change in terms of business model? What do I need to change in terms of organization internally? What do I need to change in terms of development practice? And this is where we are not completely there yet. So I think on the technical level, technical enablers, OTA, and these things, they are pretty much resolved. But when I look at the actual readiness of OEMs, the organizational, the development experience aspects, and the business model, those are the ones that are not quite there yet. So I've seen vehicles that I would generally describe as an SDV. They get updates like on a monthly basis, but it's mostly bug fixes. As a customer, I don't see anything. So in German, we have that phrase of banana software. So software that ripens at the customer. When we see something like this, it doesn't help the SDV vision, because it provides a poor user experience under the umbrella of SDV. And it's a clear indicator that the technical enablers are there, so you're capable of rolling out updates, but organizationally, you're not really capable of providing value, of investing into functions that the customer may have already paid for when buying the vehicle. And these are the things that are sometimes still lagging behind. But again, it's very different depending on which OEM you look at.
I'll say it did a lot of good with it, and it's very ambitious. And this has been a wonderful conversation, Moritz. And as we look to wrap up, what would you like our listeners and viewers to take away with them today?
So SDV from a technical perspective is solved. We know how to build updatable, upgradable vehicles. We know how to do containerization in the vehicle. The point really is on how to industrialize this at scale, looking at brownfield solutions, looking at right-sized SDV ambitions. How do we roll these things out in big global OEMs so that actually scales and is cost efficient and fast? And I think the next big journey that we will see is a tremendous shift in the developer experience. Looking at, for instance, specification driven development. So looking at agentic workflows according to specification driven development. These are the things that will fundamentally change the speed at which we can operate in terms of feature development, also including the necessary qualification within automotive. And I think we have now set the technical infrastructure. next big journey is developer experience.
And when you have the developer experience, fascinating, frankly, big, important things are built. Today is tomorrow, tomorrow is today, the future is Elektrobit. Moritz, thank you so much for coming on SAE Tomorrow Today.
Thank you for having me.
Be sure to join us next week as we discuss what SDV means and why automakers are embracing AI.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.